On Fredericton's Waterloo Row stands a somber grey Victorian mansion called Boyce House. Now, I've always been pretty suspicious of ghosts and ghost stories, mostly because once you start researching them, there's very little to go off of to use to write a story. Ghosts, of course, very seldom do interviews. But Boyce House is different. Boyce House has a ridiculous number of people talking about this ghost. And this ranges from media reports to, shall we say, more personal reports. Like, I remember this girl at a party I was at in university who had rented a place there and was really freaked out by a ghost she claimed came into her room and tidied up the place. Because here's the thing with Boyce House. According to decades of reports, it is home to one very friendly and unusually helpful ghost. This is the 4-year anniversary of the Backyard History podcast. We debuted on Halloween 2021 with the story of the Lake Utopia sea monster, and we continued our kind of somewhat spooky theme ever since, with episodes like the Spectre of Rexton the next Halloween, the fiery ghost ship of the Baie de Chaleur, and last year's Halloween special, The Ghost of Binston Manor. Today's story appears in the newest Backyard History book, Mysterious Stories from Atlantic Canada's Past, which you can buy at backyardhistory.ca.
You're listening to Backyard History, the hidden stories that happened in your own backyard, the podcast version of the weekly history column running in newspapers across the Maritimes, with your host and author, Andrew McLean.
By the 1960s, the grand old house had seen better days. Once opulent, Boyce House had recently been converted into a men's residence for University of New Brunswick students. One night, author Carol Spray wrote in her influential book of folklore, Will of the Wisp, the dawn of the residence was jolted awake by the sound of piano music echoing through the halls. Annoyed, he shouted,
"I don't know which of you idiots is banging on the piano, but don't you know what time it is?"
But the music did not stop, so he got up and he went downstairs. But when he reached the piano, nobody was there. When he turned back around, he saw something even stranger. A ghostly gray lady was floating silently on the staircase. Carol Spray wrote,
"When he turned to look at her, he realized the creature was not made of flesh and blood."
The Dawn, who had previously studied to be an Anglican minister, cried out,
"In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I command you to tell me who you are and to state your purpose."
To his immense surprise, the ghost replied that she was looking for a letter. She wanted him to open a safe in the kitchen and see if it was there.
The house had been commissioned by May Boyce, wife of Walter Boyce. Every Frederictonian knows this last name. These are the Boyces of the Boyce Farmers Market fame, and Walter Boyce is probably best remembered for donating what would now be more than $500,000 to help found that beloved market. Walter Boyce immigrated from Norfolk, England in 1886 at the age of 16, along with his 9-year-old brother. They received a land grant on what was then Fredericton's outskirts, an area called Salamanca. Back then, Fredericton was small, and Salamanca now overlaps with the ultra-wealthy Waterloo Row neighborhood, but back then, it was on the outskirts of town. And those two brothers planted a turnip farm there. It was in Salamanca that Walter met a local farmer's daughter named Mary Harding Leonard. Everyone called her May. In 1894, when Walter was 23 and May was 27, they got married. It wasn't very long after that the Boyces realized that growing turnips and selling them at the local farmer's market, which before they donated the money to build the current market, was an outdoor market in the square just outside of City Hall was not a quick path to wealth or fame. But the Boyces realized that there was indeed money in turnips. They discovered that they could make vastly more money shipping their turnips all the way up to Montreal and selling them there than they ever could selling them locally. This realization was quickly followed up by the revelation that if they bought up other farmers' produce locally and shipped it to Montreal too, they could make a whole bunch of money. And so they started their successful produce export business. Before long, the Boyces were reasonably wealthy. They moved from Salamanca to a big mansion in downtown Fredericton. Walter Boyce was elected alderman, which means city councillor, and was popular enough that the press urged him to run for bigger and better political offices. But then, tragedy struck. On October 1910, their house in Fredericton burned down. At the time of the fire, May was inside, all alone. And here things began to become more blurry. May did escape the fire alive, but her escape was a narrow one, and this fire seemed to have lingering effects on her health. After the fire, the Boyces became more reserved. They left public life behind, and Walter abandoned his promising political career. The Boyces bought a piece of land back in Salamanca at what is now 467 Waterloo Row. Somewhat unusually for the time, this paperwork for the land sale wasn't signed by Walter, it was signed by May. And in 1913, construction was completed on the opulent mansion called Boyce House. Decades later, in 1961, Boyce House was sold to the University of New Brunswick and converted into a men's residence. The day after the ghostly piano incident, the Don called a house meeting to discuss the ghost he'd seen in their residence. Much to his surprise, every other student admitted they, too, had seen or experienced something strange. One had seen the ghost in the kitchen, rummaging through their mail. He described her as
white and strong and formed a definite human shape, but it was like a mass of energy, like the energy that comes across on a television set.
Others reported more typical haunted house activity.
Furniture moving on its own, ghostly silhouettes drifting around Boyce House, and doors opening and closing in the night.
But most of the ghost's habits were downright domestic. She reportedly tidied up after the students, folding laundry, hanging up pants, and even cleaning messy dorm rooms. The students decided to look for the safe mentioned by the ghost. They began tapping on the kitchen walls, listening for a hollow sound. Sure enough, they found something. Behind some recently installed paneling was a hidden compartment. Inside was a safe, just like the ghost had said. But the safe was empty. In the years that followed, stories about the Boyce House ghost spread far and wide. A 1989 Telegraph Journal article by Sean Waters reported that
she has a soft spot for young males and likes to moonlight as their maid. Male tenants have been known to wake up tucked into bed. Others have had their pants hung up and their apartments cleaned overnight.
Eventually, the story attracted some international attention, albeit of the more sensational type. In the 1980s, the ghost was featured in American tabloids, such as Weekly World News, under lurid headlines like
"Kindly Granny haunts this house,"
and
"Little old lady doesn't know she's dead."
This, understandably, upset some people who had actually known the Boyces. For example, a man named John T. White wrote to a local newspaper saying,
"I am familiar with this house. In 1952, I met Thomas T. Boyce on board a ship. Later, an invitation from Mr. Boyce convinced me to come to the Fredericton area, and eventually Mr. and Mrs. Boyce took me under their wing, giving me a home. They were a wonderful couple, and I was always treated like a member of the family.
White complained that the portrayal of May Boyce as a helpful ghost was
blown out of context and perspective and embarrassing, and the whole thing is pure nonsense.
Still, stories of the alleged ghost's activities kept coming. In 1981, an American team of paranormal investigators, complete with TV cameras and film crews, visited Boyce House. Yes, it was those famous 1980s Ghostbusters, the ones who had investigated the house from the Amityville Horror. According to the Telegraph-Journal,
they declared her harmless, but tenants were warned not to have seances, Ouija boards, or tarot cards.
Apparently, those upset the ghost. The TV ghost investigators ultimately concluded that,
while the ghost meant well, she wished to be left alone.
Frederictonians themselves didn't have a very high opinion on these American ghost hunters and their lurid tabloid headlines. Yet, many of them quietly claimed to have encountered the ghost too. Author and journalist Jackie Webster lived in the house with her daughters for 4 years in the 1970s. She had become aware of the ghostly rumors when she moved in, but she dismissed them at first, writing,
"We treated it very tongue-in-cheek. I was more prepared to believe in the tooth fairy, but we became believers. One Christmas, the family was playing Scrabble in the living room when the fireplace suddenly lit up and burned for 2 hours. There was no wood in it. It was delightful. You always had a feeling somebody was in the house. Nothing ominous about it."
Except once. Jackie Webster had the idea to hold a seance to try and speak with the ghost.
Big mistake. It was like thunder was out in the hallway, crackling and banging. It was like having a quarrel with a friendly presence.
Other tenants at Boyce House reported similarly strange, yet ultimately rather benign, supernatural experiences. For example, in 1985, Jennifer Izzard claimed,
"The ghost puts our covers on if we kick them off at night. My roommate Joanne Blois woke up one time after someone ran their fingers through her hair, saying, 'It's all right, dear. It's all right.'"
Male tenants who've passed out outside the house after university parties have been known to wake up tucked into bed,
wrote Sean Waters. If there really is a ghost in Boyce House, one possible candidate is May Boyce herself. May lived in Boyce House with her husband Walter, his younger brother Thomas, and their servants. She and Walter never had children, but they seemed especially protective of Thomas, who had come over from England with Walter and whose life was marked by hardship. In 1906, Thomas lost a child. In 1921, he suffered a serious accident in the woods near Nappadogan that left him with lasting, lifelong health issues. His eyesight deteriorated badly. Thomas was routinely so sickly that the local newspaper, the Daily Gleaner, reported on 4 separate occasions that Thomas was on his deathbed. May and Walter Boyce died within a short time of each other in the early 1950s, leaving Thomas to spend his final years alone in Boyce House. When his health permitted, Thomas arranged flowers at the Christchurch Cathedral, but most days he was too unwell to leave Boyce House, where he stayed all alone. It is suggested that the ghost of May Boyce stuck around to care for Thomas in his final years at Boyce House. And maybe, just maybe, she still hasn't stopped looking after the people who live in Boyce House.
That was Backyard History with your host, Andrew McLean. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for another hidden story that happened in your own backyard. Produced by Jordan Lozier.